All right. I'm going to call to order the meeting of whatever today is, October 10th, 2019. And we're going to start with executive session. So I will, I got to read the language to enter into executive session, and then we'll take a vote, a roll call vote.
Explain that we're going to come back.
And then it's part of this, what I say. Item 1 is MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct contract negotiations with non-union personnel, fire chief. Item 2, MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 3, to discuss strategy with respect to threatened potential litigation. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the town and the chair so declares, library. The select board will return to public session at the end of the executive session, hopefully around 7 o'clock. I need a second and a roll call vote.
I'll second, but I think you need to clarify you did make that declaration for item 2.
Oh, I do, yes, and chair does so declare. Thank you.
Yeah, second.
Motion is seconded by Mr. Yan. Having a second, we'll now have a roll call vote. Mr. Durensis?
Aye.
Mr. Yan?
Aye.
Mr. Waldron?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson? Aye. Mr. Morrell, aye. Having passed by a vote of 5-0, the open session is now closed, and we will be returning to open session. We are now in executive session. All right, we're back in open session, so I'm going to ask our town administrator, David Williams, to read the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, we will call to order and vote to enter executive session. This was at 6 o'clock. And for executive session items, item 1, MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 2 is the exemption to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct contract negotiations with non-union personnel, fire chief. Item 2 is MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, subsection 3 is an exemption to discuss strategy with respect to threatened potential litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the town and the chair so declares, library. 7 o'clock open session, call to order, reading of agenda with proposed changes, amend or approve the agenda, and then public comment. And then consent agenda is the first item with payroll warrant, next meeting dates of October 24th, November 7th, November 21st, December 5th, December 19th, and the minutes of August 15th, 2019. Second item is update on proposed memorial at Farm Pond with Pat Cassell, resident sponsor. Third item is consideration of appointments for Agricultural Commission, Disability Advisory Committee, and Farm Pond Advisory Committee. Fourth item is update on governance articles voted at 2019 annual town meeting, Town Governance Task Force 2 with Corey Lincoln and Adam Page. Fifth item is consideration of draft sustainability coordinator job description with possible joint meeting with the town of Holliston. Number 6, routine business, finance director report, town administrator report, select board reports, and then adjourn.
Could I propose reordering this agenda?
Yes.
Because we have distinguished representatives here from the general court, we may have somebody here from Holliston. Can we extend them the courtesy and put them at the head of the...
I'm okay with that, because I know Eric has to leave early as well, and I know he wanted to discuss that item.
So move it up to item 2.
Is there anyone missing from the Holliston contingency?
Is everybody here that you think that who's here to discuss that? Okay. Sorry, I know you guys were going to be first with the memorial. If you don't mind that we move that up. Okay, thank you. So we'll amend the agenda to move item 5 up to number 2.
And I'd also make a motion to item 3A. I think it's a typo on the agenda. I think the appointment is to the Elderly and Disabled Taxation Committee for item A, not the Agricultural Commission.
Oh, okay.
So with those 2 amendments, I move approval of the agenda.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Great. We did have an executive session beforehand. There were no votes taken at that executive session. So now, there were nobody signed up for public comment, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
I so move. I provided the Assistant Town Administrator some typos on the minutes, minor non-substantive typos, but I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent. So now we're going to move up. Item number 5, consideration of draft sustainability coordinator job description. So, who wants to kick this off? Paul, do you want?
Yeah, if I could, just to tee this thing up. Since the last meeting, there's been a lot of work done by Michael Lesser and Fred Cunningham to put together a job description for a sustainability coordinator.
Paul, will you talk into the microphone? Somebody's indicating they can't hear you.
Since the last meeting, there's been a significant amount of work done by Michael Lesser and Fred Cunningham to put together a job description for a sustainability coordinator. They have put together and have on the agenda for tonight a draft of that job description. I've worked with them and had a meeting with them and have essentially no problems with the proposed job description. The job description does make reference to collaborating with the town of Holliston in several places, and it includes also working with other communities that may fit into some of the more regional type of programs, such as energy aggregation and the like. Having said all that, I wonder if I could turn it over to Michael Lesser to kind of walk us through what he has put together. I think he did the last version. So do you want?
Before you go up to the microphone, that would be.
Yeah, sure. It's a joint effort. Oops. How does this sound? Okay? All right. Should I report Michael Lesser, 54 Forest Street, and Chair of the Energy Committee. There's an October 7th job description that was put forth after a number of back and forths with people and a number of versions. Essentially, the position now, I'm curious to see how it goes with the Holliston and how we figure out how to collaborate, obviously. This was, just to be clear, this was done as if we were doing our own part-time position until we had not gotten full guidance as to how we would work out something with Holliston at this point. So therefore, I don't want you to feel neglected in the way that it's anything that I say, but hopefully it's something that also applies to the way Holliston would want to do the work as well. We're trying to respond to the town warrant that was passed at town meeting last time and capture the spirit of that, as well as the fact that it also had an open-ended clause at the end, and to deal with concerns about people feel about to what extent this position covers its costs, the financial implications of this position. Clearly, some of the funding from the state level would make a big difference in how that is done or achieved. But the job summary here is written a little bit, it matches up with what's in the town warrant article. There's a memo to all of the board here that shows a mapping of each of the specific major items in the job summary and how they cover all of the specific items in the town warrant, so that we feel that it addresses it that way. I don't know whether that got sent out beforehand or not. I can go through it as necessary. In the end, the document here is a little, And to some extent, as also highlighted in the memo to everyone, that there are some terms and areas of coverage in this job description that go a little bit beyond the town warrant, under the rubric of there's other tasks to be done in there, but they're things that match well with sustainability, such as just the area of moving into more renewable energy as part of dealing with sustainability. Is not per se in the town warrant, but I think it's part of the spirit of what it meant to have a sustainability coordinator. It didn't, and in the town warrant, there wasn't a lot about the cost covering, it was about grant writing, but there's even more explicit language here about this position having a metric, an evaluation metric of being cost covering. So even that kind of language is in addition, really, so that we tried to go with the spirit of the town warrant in a broader way, too, in terms of some of the issues that have been brought up since about this. But essentially, and it tries to present a little bit more of a framework for how to approach sustainability at the town and the region, in the sense that it brings a little bit more emphasis on the idea that we also have to do some planning and thinking about the overall picture of what should we be doing, what gives us the most bang for our dollar, and that could be evaluated in several ways. It could be just simply dollars saved on a budget or dollars gained from external financing, but to keep in mind some of the, I would say, the spirit of sustainability issues of really trying to recognize that there is an evaluation metric in a sense of to what extent are we addressing climate change and sustainability. I think that was part of the spirit of what people were thinking of when they vote for a sustainability coordinator. I could be wrong. It was part of what I and others felt, but that I think that given a lot of the events of recent times now, without getting too on a soapbox, that I think that the issue of climate change is quite important. We're seeing a lot of the implications of that now, and the sooner the better. Some people might vary as to whether it's how much of a crisis. I personally think it is one, and we've long overdue in terms of making a movement towards that. We don't see it as much in Sherborn. So, in that sense, there's a task. It's a little bit more framed now with the idea of a planning component to say what is it that makes sense to do at the town level, at the regional level with other towns, and that could be factoring in what funding opportunities are around, as well as what gives us the most bang for the buck in terms of cost savings, as well as lessening our carbon footprint. And that is so that we can, as a group, as a community, figure out both at the town level and for residential initiatives and commercial initiatives, what makes the most sense to try to undertake and see if we could achieve a consensus based on some metrics that are easy enough to do. And then the job involves doing some of that at the same time, obviously having to figure out how to do some fundraising for some of these activities and grant writing and collaborating with other towns, and then help with actual implementation of the specific programs or projects that we want to do, whether it's town efficiency measures, whether it's a town renewable energy project, or it's also helping residential level improvements in renewable energy, group buying of things, whether it's group purchasing of renewable energy or aggregation and other kind of ways there, as well as group programs just for energy efficiency, getting people to do more mass save or just group purchases, and getting people more motivated. People will do more as a collective. We all sit around thinking of how it's hard to do when it's hard to do it, but that I think when we start doing things together, people feel much more, when I talk to people, feel much more eager to do things when they're part of a group. But in a sense, and that's the education and outreach, which was part of the town warrant and is part of this thing here, is obviously critical, both for letting people know as well as to achieve a consensus in town as to what we think is reasonable to do, what the town should be spearheading, what a position like this should be working on. So it's both educating people as well as making sure we have feedback both ways as to how this job should be done. And obviously there's a lot of collaboration with all the town entities is one of the other tasks. One of the things to also discuss is how the position works in our town structure. This has moved towards, I'll say that the Energy Committee was something that was quite vibrant a number of years ago and did a lot of activities. This new position has opened up the thing again that the Energy Committee is being revived. We will hopefully soon have 7 members, and that we've met a couple of times already, and now have scheduled to meet regularly. And so that, hopefully, given our past track record, that and the fact that we're interested in in reviving this and moving forward on these things, that this position could report within our structure to the Energy Committee. Obviously, it doesn't have to be that way. There are options, but I'll make the play for that. I think that, and the proof will be in the pudding. You'll see how we do as a committee to that extent. The Select Board has the right to change that at any moment, or it might take them a week or two. But whatever, so we have the job summary there, and they're essentially, the job duties somewhat parallel those things there. There's a lot of detail there. Some people didn't like the detail for a job description, argue others, but I think it gives a lot of specificity as to what the kind of things we think about. So it's a little bit more of an educational thing.
Thank you, Michael.
Can I say one thing just to supplement something?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the features of this is to take the energy that we've seen from the citizen volunteers who filed the petition and institutionalize it by proposing that they become members of the Energy Committee. And by making them members of the Energy Committee, and they've agreed to serve on the Energy Committee, by making them part of the Energy Committee, they solve two problems in town. First of all, they bring all kinds of fresh blood and energy to the Energy Committee. The second is that as Mike has so nicely phrased it, the Energy Committee was quiet for a while. This will have the benefit of bringing that Energy Committee back to the vibrancy that we need, even beyond the sustainability coordinator issues. So it fixes a committee and it captures all the energy of these citizen volunteers. That's a slight change from the town meeting vote, because the town meeting vote had the committee reporting to the Board of Selectmen and reporting to the town administrator. So the wording that was agreed to here was that the new sustainability coordinator would report to the Energy Committee under the general supervision of the town administrator. And of course, the town administrator is generally under our jurisdiction.
I just want to, because since that issue is upon us, I think you guys did a fantastic job writing the job description, but I think the position should report to the Select Board, because that's how it was written in the town warrant. I think they could work collaboratively with the Energy Committee, kind of like Sharon, as an example, Sharon works collaboratively with the advisory committee, but she doesn't report to the advisory committee. She works with them at every one of their meetings. So I just think the Energy Committee being a new committee, the town vote was clearly the Select Board was going to appoint this position. I'm of the opinion that it should stay that way.
Yeah, kudos to Michael and Fred and Paul, because the last time we talked about this, the goal was to have the job description track the warrant article that was approved at town meeting as closely as possible. And you all did a great job doing that, with this one exception, which was I'm not sure whether it would require a new town meeting warrant, but the warrant that was approved was going to report to the town administrator, who's also the chief personnel officer. And I think there's a good policy position for that. A lot of this is financial. Has financial impacts and budgetary impacts, working with lots of different committees in town. So I like the position description very much. I don't like the change in the reporting authority. I think that we need to be as respectful and dutiful to the warrant that was approved at town meeting.
So, I guess what are you looking for specifically? So we talk about report to, under, appoint, and blah, 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 blah. Is there something specific? So I'm looking at the town meeting language. It says the select board shall appoint a sustainability coordinator. I do believe something that can be delegated. The appointment, maybe to something can be delegated, but very specific under powers and duties. A's, he or she shall report to town administrator. It doesn't say report to the select board, it says report to the town administrator. To me, that second one sounds more specific than the first one, and that's just how I'm seeing that. Because so much staff comes under the select board, and we also don't have to do it every admin and whatever else. You know, that gets delegated on a regular basis. The specificity of reporting and to another position, not to a board but to a position, Tim, does seem more specific. So I guess what are you suggesting? What are you proposing?
Well, I guess the town administrator, it could report to the town administrator. I mean, it's more a matter of how you just physically figure out the data, it's not necessarily even, it's somewhat day-to-day, it's a part-time position, and how you basically, how we interface. I mean, there's even issues of interfacing with the town planner, who has done a lot of work and sits on the Energy Committee at the moment, and how this works out. I mean, there's alternatives of reporting to the town planner, but we want to coordinate with that.
Gino's still a member of the Energy Committee.
Yes, he still is, but he hasn't been part of any of this because it opens up the door for him to actually apply for it. Just the way the job is structured, it says up to 19 and a half hours, so it doesn't specify that level because it might depend on what our budget is, what we decide, and what somebody's experience and salary requirements are. That this could be anywhere from a 13 to a 19 and a half hour job, depending on who we get that's appropriate, and we could decide on. But I think it's more a matter of how to figure out, I mean, there's a piece of paper, and then there's the de facto, what does it take to actually get work done? And to figure out who's guiding things and who the person is collaborating with, which will obviously be a number of people. But you do want to avoid some issues of triangulation and where things can get a little confusing for a staff person. So you try to figure out some balance of that, or whether the town administrator could be on this piece of paper, but the extent that that an Energy Committee sits there and meets with that person every 2 weeks of a meeting, and we go over things, and we're basically directing it, and the town administrator says, you're basically working with and agreeing to things with the Energy Committee, it could work fine. I just don't want to get into, it's trying to avoid a certain kind of chain of command, not in a bad way, but in the way of where it's like, okay, they have to talk to the town administrator to what to do, versus the fact that we've talked to the Energy Committee meeting, and it's okay, whatever we come out of the committee meeting is good, because we're all in agreement, and it doesn't have to be second
I
guessed.
think this person definitely should work with the Energy Committee. Like I said, like a lot of other town positions work with a number of committees, but with it being, as Chuck said, broad-based, working with a number of different departments, I feel like it does make sense for it to report to the town administrator.
I guess I'm sort of torn on this because first of all, we Governor's Task Force was here tonight, sitting in the back of the room, and Dave was our procurement officer. Then he's now our HR person, and he's also our IT person. So, and he's been very involved in the library. So, from my perspective, I think we have to make sure that we're not overburdening the town administrator. I think what you're saying makes sense if they can sort of have a reporting relationship to the town administrator, but I think that supervisory day-to-day supervision would be better off with people who have the expertise in energy savings and in sustainability, and that it's really sort of more of a personnel reporting relationship. And as you pointed out, I forget where it was Paul or Chuck, the financial issues too, understanding particularly if they're grants and we're trying to make financial decisions. But I think this person is going to need to work really closely with the Energy Committee.
And I do want to say, at least my opinion is not about the effectiveness, it's about the specificity of the town meeting language. The town voted on something. I think what might be up for grabs here, or might be up for interpretation, is maybe the hiring of the personnel, but I think the reporting is black and white. It's written in black
Would you
and white.
differentiate between reporting and supervising? Is that kind of a semantic
That's what
game
I'm
to
trying
play?
to say.
See, if you look, just to focus this, if you look at the job description on page 1, we're talking about the fourth box down, which says, reports directly to indicate job title. And the proposal is, position reports to Energy Committee under the general supervision of the town administrator.
I think
That's the proposed line.
I think it should read position reports to the town administrator with collaboration with the Energy Committee.
Paul, can I ask Paul a question? So Paul, what's your opinion, says from your lawyer hat, of what that says? Position reports to Energy Committee under the general supervision of the town administrator. And how does that mesh with the town meeting article that says he or she shall report to the town administrator?
I think it does, because this essentially reports to the town administrator. It just, because it says under the general supervision of the town administrator, and under the details of who the person talks to, it says the Board of Selectmen, other committees in town, and the town administrator. So the person, when you talk to somebody, what's the fine line between talking to somebody, reporting to, being under the general supervision of, I think that's close enough to the intent of the, so if you look at communications and contacts, which is Roman numeral 5, which is the second to the last page, the box, this is a pre-existing form which things have been typed into, and it says communications and contacts. It lists the jobs, external departments or organizations with which the job has most frequent contact, describe the purpose and frequency of the contacts. And so it has the Energy Commission, it has town departments, it has the town administrator, it has a select board, it has advisory committee. So you have somebody who is communicating and contacting. I think we're making a very fine line.
Well, I have a proposal, actually. What if we reverse the two words? What if we said that reports to the town administrator under the general supervision of the Energy Committee? Because that's what I'm trying to say, is that the Energy Committee is the day-to-day supervision, and the town administrator is the
Person
reporting.
reports to, and I think,
If we just reverse those two.
Read, Paul, I mean, a reporting relationship matters. David is already the town's personnel administrator, so every employee in
Right.
town is working under the general supervision, particularly procedurally. The first certain governance task force, when we considered making the TA the personnel administrator, it was to have consistency across the decision, that the process was followed, and that we coordinated with the personnel committee. But I fundamentally disagree. A reporting relationship is different than general supervision. So, Jeff, I think your proposal
Just reverse the two.
works. But
Yeah.
the language at the town, the last meeting we had on this position description, one of the main discussions was trying to be as true to the ATM, the annual town meeting warrant, as possible. The first items is that the sustainability coordinator, he or she shall report to the town administrator and coordinate with. That's a direct reporting relationship. So
Doesn't have the word direct in there.
Pardon me?
Doesn't have the word direct in there. You're reading a word into it that's actually not there.
I said he, she shall report to the town administrator.
And then you said that's a direct reporting relationship. I'm just pointing out that doesn't say it's a direct reporting relationship.
I don't know how else you interpret the words "shall report." I don't think there's any legal or common sense explanation of it meaning anything
Michael,
other than
do you
a reporting.
have something new to?
I just want to bring up one item, sort of a thing. How much we want to, given who is in the audience and the other issues to hear about Holliston, how much you want to postpone the nitty-gritty of this, which I think we're close to
That's fine.
something,
We should
but
hear
how
from
much
other
whether
people
you
as
should work out the other stuff with the Holliston, hear what they have to say, and bring in other people before we get lost in
Okay.
the wordsmithing.
That's fine.
Of this, that it might be a better use of their time.
Okay. So, are you from, I'm sorry, I don't even,
I'm John Cronin,
okay,
Select Board Holliston, Chronically Roman, our chairman.
okay.
Do you want to hear from us or the distinguished representatives first?
Yeah, maybe Holliston and then,
Would you like to
Great.
sit here?
yes,
Well,
please,
let's
so then they
give
go
you
behind the
the seat of
microphone.
honor, or the hot seat, as some people might think of it.
Good evening.
You want to start?
Sure. So, I think this obviously gives us a great opportunity to work with the town of Sherborn as regionally, some of the things that we would probably go for grants for would include region work. And so I think that's a really good intent of what the idea was about. The one thing that we do have a concern is the funding mechanism, because we're not sure how it was written. That is Holliston going to have its own part-time facilities coordinator as Sherborn does and work together on regional things? Or is this just going to be one position and I'm not really clear about that, so I'm glad the state representative is here, who was involved with writing the article. Because I do know that one of the concerns some of the residents have is that when you apply for some of the grants that are local, that you might actually be competing with Sherborn for some of these grants. So it becomes a little cloudy with that part, but with the regional ones, I think it works really nicely. So there's a little give and take there. Both towns are different from one another, so our needs are a little different, and our objectives might be a little bit different, but I imagine our goals will be very similar. So I think it needs to be worked out as to what would be the best arrangement, and I'm sure Carolyn might be able to speak to that as to what the article allows, what it doesn't allow. I think it was to create collaboration for regional basis, regional work, which is a really good thing. But we have some of these issues that we need to work out.
Can I just throw something out here? We've been contemplating and talked about having an intermunicipal agreement under Chapter 40, Section 4A, between Holliston and Sherborn. And in that document, we'd work out the details that you're discussing. But in order to kind of move the ball down the field, at least let's get a first down on something, we felt we had to deal with what is the position and what is the position going to do. But we're contemplating a second document, which would be signed by the Board of Selectmen in Holliston and signed by the Board of Selectmen in Sherborn, that would try to figure out the relationship between the two towns in this position.
That would be.
So it wasn't that we were excluding you, it's just that we had to figure out what piece do we pick up first.
Right.
They're also eager to get going with it, too.
Right, absolutely. And we know how things can move pretty slowly with municipal government, so it's important that we do get moving, so.
Can I make a couple of remarks, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely.
So good evening. My name's John Cronin. I'm a member of the Select Board in Holliston. This is my first time in this beautiful building, so it was really nice to step into a piece of history and really take in what you have here. It's quite nice, and it's also nice to see Mr. Durensis, who I've not seen since my freshman orientation a little while ago. Pleasure to see you again this evening, sir. From my perspective, I want to. This is kind of coming full circle for me. We began talking with the group from the Upper Charles Committee about a year ago, I think. I might be off by a little bit. They presented early as a very earnest, hardworking group that contributed some great ideas towards this notion of having a sustainability coordinator. My position at the time was that I was in on the idea, but I wanted a plan. I wanted something that this individual hire could fall back on for a policy job description, if you will. Being a new position, it was critical for me to believe that whomever we brought on board would have a game plan. And at that time, we began also a dialogue through a state grant to become MVP certified. And for the folks at home who may not be familiar with that, that's the Municipal Vulnerability Program. I'm not personally privy to what Sherborn's position on that is right now, so forgive me if you folks have got that, that's great. But we progress. We've become certified. Our community has gone through various exercises with stakeholders to establish what we see as a customized plan that Holliston is going to have to follow in order to maintain grant eligibilities and identify areas of sustainability, areas to work on. So all that work has been done in the last month, and it's been great. I have to tell you, I came here tonight knowing our board has not had too much of a progression of dialogue. We have been watching and hearing from you. We have not had a vote relative to this position since our town meeting approved it this past spring in terms of the funding. I want to thank Representative Linsky and Representative Dykeman for their help trying to fund this. I think it's phenomenal. It really jump-started the interest and breathed some life into it. From my own personal perspective, and again, it's just me, we haven't voted on this, I've come tonight to basically say, with all due respect, I believe Holliston needs to go in its own separate direction. I believe we need to hire our own individual. And I'd be highly interested in discussing the financial settlement of this so that we can square away where the earmark language from the General Appropriation Act can land. How much would go to Sherborn, how much would go to Holliston. And I fell upon that conclusion as a result of a few things, and I just wanted to go over those very briefly with you. We had some discussions locally about what the concept of this position in Sherborn would be, and some very clear issues came out. Mr. Aronian just brought one of them out, and I don't think it's inescapable, and that's the fundamental part of this job is going to include grant writing. A lot of people believe that the position ought to fund itself, and I believe Mr. Cunningham and others have been helping us understand that there's seemingly limited opportunities for grants out there, and it would be inherently a conflict for an individual who works here, a certain amount of hours in a week, to then take off a different hat, go down the street, and wear a different hat, and begin writing a grant for the same purpose, and effectively competing against one another. And I think if this is a big part of the job, and I believe it is, that led me to think maybe it's time to go it alone. And then furthermore, I've read the job description. I have to second your opinions, gentlemen, on the work that Mr. Lesser and Mr. Cunningham did. It's a great job description. But I read it and I felt if I were to write it, it would look a lot like this, but I think it would still be just substantially different. I think our town, as Mark said, has a different notion that may focus more on the MVP game plan that I mentioned and some of the sustainability pieces that come from it. There's a lot of overlap. There's a wide breadth of work that can be done in this program. It's a new position. We're quite excited to bring it on. My thinking tonight is I was hoping maybe we can talk about the financial part of the settlement. So thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'm gonna have, he's gotta leave at 7:45, so I'm gonna let him talk, and then we'll have you guys.
And honestly, our discussions have reflected somewhat to your discussions. I definitely get that. I believe this earmark, it is a one-year earmark, and I know there is also within the same night we've talked about some aspects of regionalization as to how this benefits the regionalization. I actually think that maybe this board, and at least this is going to take your opinion, might be reasonably consistent with each other. Something I at least think we should consider is that I think it's actually written such as Sherborn shall hire a sustainability coordinator, and will also benefit Holliston. It might be an opportunity for you to actually get a few hours for a year to fund someone. So you get someone funded, feel out what you want, and then maybe we absorb ours and you have yours. Something like that. We do a one-year thing, interim basis. I think we are a little bit, just ahead of you time frame on this amount. We've discussed it and done whatever. It might be an opportunity to still share an earmark, share part of a staff, get a few hours or whatever else, and again, structure ultimately what you're looking for. It's new to all of us. And I don't know, there's just a couple of them in the region. Framingham has one. Who else has one? I don't know. Yeah, exactly. It's relatively new. So it's just a suggestion for you guys to kick over there, that you could basically get someone that you don't have to fund to see what you want.
Could I?
Hey, can we hear from, I'd like to hear from the representatives, please. That'd be great.
Take the seat here.
Thank you.
I'm going to go first. Is that
Please.
okay, Carolyn?
Your home turf.
My home turf. Thank you, folks. It's always a pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Representative David Linsky, and with me is my colleague from Holliston, Representative Carolyn Dykema. So I think our job is to tell you what you can do with the money and what you can't do with the money. So, and I'm concerned about time here, quite frankly, because if you don't take this money soon, I'm just going to be quite frank, you're going to lose this money. So you have a couple of options here, the way I see it, and I'd appreciate Carolyn's comments on this too. We've been in communication with the State Department of Administration and Finance, who do the job of actually distributing and earmark money here, and they take the position that they're going to write one check to one town, and if there is a memorandum of understanding between the two towns, they'll honor that, that's not a problem. But one town then has to write a check to the other town if you want to split the money. Our original intent, quite frankly, was that there was going to be a shared position because we were under the impression that neither town was in a position to have or need a full-time sustainability coordinator, so it made sense to do this. But if the two towns want to go their own separate ways, that's not our business. That's in the purview of the select boards of the two towns. So I think that's really where we are. We worked on this cooperatively. To try to change the wording now, quite frankly, doesn't really make sense from a time and effort standpoint for what we're talking about. So I think, and unless Carolyn has other thoughts, our recommendation to you would be that one of the towns accept the money, you split the money down the middle, you write a memorandum of understanding to do that, if you don't want to hire the same person and have it a shared position. So Carolyn, you want to chime in here or anything?
Sure, and I think that's absolutely right, David. I guess at first I would just like to say thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to be in Sherborn, as my selectman Cronin mentioned earlier. What a beautiful building and a beautiful town. I would also like to congratulate the town of Sherborn as well as the town of Holliston for making so much progress and getting this initiative for a sustainability coordinator moving so quickly. I think it's really exciting. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I will also highlight that we in the House passed a Greenworks bill in July that is committed to dedicating $1 billion over the next 10 years to grant funding that would go specific to municipalities through a number of opportunities related to energy efficiency, resiliency, a whole number of things. So your efforts around a coordinator and establishing one is perfectly timed. We are hopeful that this bill will make it through the Senate. But this...
Is that $1 billion or $1 million?
It is $1 billion over 10 years. So it is a substantial commitment on the part of the House toward addressing what we believe is truly an urgent climate need. So that said, having a sustainability coordinator locally who is planning and executing on some of these grant applications is going to be extremely important. So that sort of to lay the foundation for what David had mentioned, which is I was approached by Holliston with a number of questions about how the money might be used if Holliston were to choose a different path for a sustainability coordinator. So I did speak to Administration and Finance, who, as David said, cuts the checks. And we really have, there were two options legally that we could pursue to add some flexibility to how the money was distributed. One was to change the language through a piece of legislation that would make it clear the money would be divided equally. As David had said, my concern with that, as any of you who have dealt with legislation know, that can be a months-long effort. And given that this earmark effectively expires at the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of June, the clock is ticking, and I think we would all be well served to get the check from the state as soon as possible. The other option, which would facilitate a more timely resolution, would be, as David mentioned, to have A&F cut the check, which would come to Sherborn, and there would be an intermunicipal agreement between Holliston and Sherborn that effectively Sherborn would then cut a check immediately to Holliston. The one thing I did clarify, some of these earmarks are reimbursement. So there's an invoice that has to be submitted to the state, and the state reimburses, which would mean potentially a multi-check situation. That is not the case in this instance. There would be one check, there would be one exchange between two communities, and two communities are free to use the funds as they will for their own coordinator. So there is some flexibility here, and again, I would just underscore what David said, is the latter, the MOU would be the path that I would suggest be pursued.
So if I could, we do want to do a intermunicipal agreement, but I haven't given up on the notion of sharing things with Holliston with the same coordinator. I know this board hasn't taken a position, and I think Holliston hasn't taken a position yet. The advantage that I see to a shared position is that together we're much more likely to get grants. Together Sherborn is a small community of 4,000 people. And for Sherborn to put in an application looking for all this kind of money alone would be greatly enhanced by having Holliston as part of that. And I think Holliston, if it was acting alone, would be enhanced by having Sherborn as part of it. We're joining communities. There's this whole emphasis on regionalization that goes on. There's efficiencies and so on. Is it possible that the coordinator might be doing different things for different communities? Yes. Nothing is perfect in the world. But there is enough, I think, that are consistent. And I don't see this position limited to writing grants. I think of things like electrical aggregation, where we form essentially an organization that would buy energy, electricity, for example, cheaply from a utility and give cheaper electrical bills to all the residents of the town. To do that effectively, Sherborn with 4,000 people versus combined, and we were even talking about trying to add additional communities to such a thing and trying to make it even bigger and broader so that there'd be volume purchasing. So all this is a long way of saying that I don't think we're at the position that we want to walk away from a joint position. We may end up there, but I think it's worth our first trying to finalize what the position is. And if necessary, I would invite Holliston to, if you have comments about we'll send you a copy of the job description and add what you think might be useful there. But I think we should give that a chance first. See if we can work it out. And then if we can't work it out, then go the route of, okay, we just split it up and we go our separate ways.
Yeah, echo one of the things that you're saying, Paul. John, I agree with you. Some of these grants would be competing. It's going to be an award to Holliston or Sherborn or somebody else. I think the education outreach should be the same for both towns. So I think that's a great shared regionalized approach. But Paul, I like your idea of trying to make it as shared a position as possible.
I guess I would just say from Representative Linsky's and my perspective, we are clearly here to serve what the two communities would like to do. I guess I would just underscore what was said earlier about the importance of timing and moving quickly with whatever the towns decide is in the best interest. And I think just from what you're saying, there's nothing that would prohibit, and certainly I think everyone would encourage, even if there are separate coordinators, that they should work together regionally to come up where possible and where it makes sense, joint applications. Because clearly joint applications for a lot of these grant programs are prioritized over single communities that apply on their own.
I agree with you. I think if both towns, even if we went the separate route, as he suggested, and I kind of agree with him, that we have the two sustainability coordinators, I would imagine they would work collaboratively and regionally so they could get regional grants when appropriate or work on education together along with hopefully other communities in the area also hire sustainability coordinators so they can all work together.
Well, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the local activists in both Sherborn and Holliston who were incredibly passionate, committed, and frankly made their voice heard with both David and I very clearly about the need for this position when truthfully I did not understand the value that it could bring to communities, and I'm very much a convert. I think there's a tremendous potential in this, and I think the local folks that have really made it happen, many of whom are here in this room, are really to be commended.
I just want to make 2 points, and one, if you're going to try to negotiate a joint position, put a time deadline on this, please. We don't want to see you lose this money, okay? And so, really, don't drag this out much longer because I'm really concerned about you losing this money. I don't want to see that happen.
We want the check in hand.
Yeah, and then the second issue is, I have experience with this, and Jillian Wilson Martin, who was the Natick sustainability coordinator has saved the people in Natick literally millions of dollars at this point. It is well worth it, both in terms of the energy savings, the aggregation issues, the grants that she has brought in. Whoever you bring in needs to have some long conversations with her and with the town administrator in Natick. This is what you can do with this position. What Natick has done is the model for the sustainability coordinators. So I would highly, highly recommend that you do this. And the bill that my colleague Rep. Dykema was talking about is moving along, and so I would get the sustainability coordinator on board sooner than later, so that that person is in a position to start accessing some of that money that's going to be out there. That's my pitch.
Thank you. We have other,
I do want to recognize the 20th anniversary of David Litsky representing the town. Congratulations for 20 years.
You know, it's funny, Paul, I noticed that your original colleague, when you were first elected to the was up there.
Under Henry Garfield.
do we have, Michael, do you?
Yeah, I don't know if it's at the level of this meeting or with the two of you here, but as I'm hearing, now we have the option of, we will do an agreement between the two communities. It's just a matter of whether what's shared is a position or whether shared is money.
That's correct.
Now we have the option to share the money. Is it something at this level to discuss now, whether, do we know what the criteria are to just apply for the check, so to speak, so that we don't lose it? Do we have to have somebody in place? Do we just have to have, the fact that we're in this process now, should we essentially apply now for the money? Because we're going to hire somebody in some number of months, one way or another, and whether that's something that we need to talk with you, or if that's at a lower level, at some other level, to just figure it out.
My understanding, and I will clarify, is that A&F could write the check today without actually having someone in place, just anticipating that that would happen. There would have to be, obviously, some proof, if asked, that the funding went to that use. I guess what I would say is that this question about how the funding will be distributed between the two communities needs to be resolved through some kind of memo prior to the request, so that memo would go with the request to the state for the funding, so it was clear about how that would be
So we couldn't
dealt
have
with.
the option of saying it's going to be either split dollar-wise or through a position. We couldn't have that as two options in our.
No,
invoices.
that
We
needs
have
to be
pick one or the
resolved
other.
first.
So I think we need to work with
Yeah.
the select board in Holliston to come up with our agreement. I think we need to figure that out.
John Winston?
Yeah.
May I ask you,
Oh, John, I was actually, sorry.
No, please go right ahead. Okay. Just a quick question. A memorandum of understanding is different than an IMA, municipal agreement. It sounds to me like a memorandum of understanding would be a good way to move, if I'm hearing you both correctly, would be a good way to move forward so that we could say, yes, we are going to do this, whether it's one person or two people. There's an understanding between the two. Is that correct?
The agreement would need to say how the funds were going to be distributed, whether it would be paying for a single individual between the two towns, or whether there would be effectively a splitting of the money, and the money going to one community and half going to the other.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Keough, did you, go ahead.
The thing that occurs to me, and this is really for Mr. Cronin, that by hiring one sustainability coordinator for both towns will eliminate a lot of duplication of effort. They could accomplish so much more if they were working, if one person were working for both towns.
George, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
In the actual wording, it says that it's a position.
Sorry, David, can you bring the microphone a little?
Oh, yeah, it's covered, sorry. In the language, it says that this is for a sustainability coordinator position. So does a contractor fall under that, or is this for a payrolled employee? Because we've been going under the assumption that it has to be a payroll employee.
I don't think a problem with a contractor would exist.
No, same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to remark, I think internally from our position, as I mentioned in my remarks, our board hasn't had a discussion about the next step.
Okay.
Logically, to the rep's points, time is of the essence. I think internally we need to talk about putting this on our agenda in the coming weeks to come up with an idea of what we believe. We're a three-person board, our third member's not here this evening. What our consensus and our vote is to take, and then we engage your board on that dialogue.
Yeah, if you'd like a couple of us to attend one of your meetings to discuss it, we'd be happy to do that.
Or if you'd like us not to attend. You guys get to decide.
Michael Lesser again. I guess to the extent that we consider the joint point position, that we deal with the fact that we're always struggling with the issue of having a benefited position versus part-time positions, that I see that as how you coordinate over the long term, having a position. I don't know if two towns can share a benefited position versus one town is the employer and there's an agreement as to how they work. But I guess that would I just want that to be factored in, whether that's possible to have an employee that's paid from two separate towns and how that deals with the towns diverge in their level of funding or in the future, or whether then you just restructure after a year or something like that. I just want to make sure that somehow that gets factored in the short term of the practicalities of whether we need to do a hire just for this fiscal year's funding. That's the question.
Well, that leads to a question that we had discussed internally. So let's take, we have the 50,000 this year. We do gangbusters. Is it possible to get a second 50,000 next year to help us move this thing along and really launch it off the runway and not cut our funding halfway?
I think the Greenworks initiative would be the source of, what is the status of the Greenworks initiative?
Passed the House, awaiting Senate action.
And it passed the House at the $1 billion funding level?
Debbie?
I have Debbie DeMar, Hollis Street. I have a question about that very thing. If we have a sustainability coordinator in place, will we be the low man on the list for the $1 billion? Okay. So it's whether you have them or not, it's not for just new.
So the bill itself has multiple parts to it, and so there are different grants available targeted to different climate-related needs. One component of that provides funding for sustainability coordinator positions. So other communities who maybe aren't as far along as Sherborn and Holliston would be looking for their first sustainability coordinator at that point. There's nothing in there, from my recollection, that would prevent Sherborn and Holliston for applying for that grant again to fund a second year of sustainability coordinator.
Yes, John?
Just to follow up on Carolyn saying, I mentioned earlier that we are actively involved in an MVP grant process. We're entering phase 2, and we have hopes, realistic hopes, optimistic hopes, I guess you could say, that grant could come to the town of Holliston in the form of many dollars and offset the cost of this position in FY21 or beyond. That's one of the reasons we entered into that program. So we see a financial path towards, no pun intended, the sustainable funding for the position.
Okay. Well, I think from here, what we need to do is we'll hear from Holliston about either whether you want us to come to your meeting. We'll coordinate through David.
Yeah, absolutely.
And are you the town administrator from Holliston? I'm sorry. And we can figure that out. But I think until we kind of work the intermunicipal agreement with Holliston, then I don't think we vote on this tonight. Is that?
Well, I'd like to finalize this job description. We're stuck on little words, and
but
this has gone on
but
for
one thing,
a long
Paul.
time.
This mentions working with Holliston, and they haven't even voted that.
It just says working with communities such as
okay.
I don't see that we have to, even if they go their own way, we still want to work with them, as I think has been pointed out.
That's fine. I think, and as Chuck and I both pointed out, I think we could vote on this, I would want to switch the wording of the reporting.
If we could get this finalized, then I would say let's,
Yeah, yes, yes.
I would actually like to thank the Holliston people for coming.
Oh, yes, and the representatives, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for supporting us, and we'll do the best I can to honor that support. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think what we're gonna look at that, well, do we have a motion to approve the job description?
I'm just going to make a motion to approve the job description as is with the slight change to the reporting relationship, which is just switching the two parties. So we'll say the position reports to the town administrator under the general supervision of the Energy Committee.
second, just to get this thing done.
Yep. David?
The Personnel Board looked at this the other day, and it's supposed to come back to them. They advised a couple of different changes that I saw as non-substantial. Could you do pending vote of the Personnel
Pending vote of the
Board?
personnel?
Could we add, I don't want to have it.
Subject to their change. I think if they're that,
It's non-substantial.
it's their area of expertise, I don't know that we need to
The
review
non-substantive
it.
changes.
It doesn't have to come back here.
Right.
So let's just to say incorporating any changes deemed necessary by the Personnel Board.
Incorporating changes from the Personnel Board is my motion.
Yep, second.
All those in favor? Great, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Let's go back to our agenda now.
Passed.
Yes.
Passed.
It was that $1 billion green boards.
All right, so moving on now to our second item on the agenda, the update on the proposed memorial at Farm Pond. I don't think Pat's here, but I think Aronian, is that your?
I'm David Aronian.
David Aronian, yes. Now you're putting on your other hat.
Oh, really? One night, you know? When I found out, I was like, oh my God.
There's a 5-minute limit at that table.
So my understanding after talking with Pat is that I'm really here just to talk about the trees, is that correct? Or do we want to go a complete overview? Or?
I would like to know, I have more questions than that. I just want to know where it's at, because I mean, we had when we voted on this, I think it was that we were generally in favor of it, but we needed to see a plan. I think we need to know the funding's in place, those items, so.
Yeah, well, so Pat was going to be handing us a deposit check tonight, but she's feeling under the weather. But she would like to get going on the project in November, and she was ready to give us the deposit check now, and I guess funding is on its way. She's raising money. And so things seem to be moving pretty well.
Okay.
Maybe bring this up to you.
Yeah, if you lay it on the table, I think he can get a camera on it. Right, Rick?
This is completely color rendered one.
Would you like an easel?
This is the material we were thinking of using for the walkway. It's just a smoother surface for wheelchairs.
And that's DDA compliant.
The TAs on
Two trees that we've been talking about.
So those are not, well, actually, this one here is not on, that's the largest one. And we'll show you a picture of that.
Does the planning board have to vote on those?
And, well, some members of the Farm Pond Advisory Committee are here as well that I want to talk to about the.
Well, they had some planning board.
Oh, yeah, but I don't planning board, that's on
Trees.
roads.
I'm not sure whether this applies to the planning board, because they review tree decisions on some parts of town.
I'm not sure. Addie May, he was just asking if a tree, they're talking about wanting to take down some trees at Farm Pond, 2 trees at Farm Pond. Does the planning board approve that, or is that? Or
Does it fall into scenic?
you just approve trees on scenic roads, correct?
We just do scenic roads, and we have them.
So that wouldn't fall under that. So I think it would be, we'd want to talk to the Farm Pond Advisory Committee about that.
I mean, They're visible from the scenic road.
No,
That's the
there's a
scenic
very
road.
specific definition
Right
of
on
a
the
scenic
road.
road and how many feet off of a scenic road
Okay.
the trees fall. Right, is that,
Yeah, I go see if I can find yeah, but I don't think it.
You could still go through that process and have them make the determination.
The rock walls.
Vote for that.
It's usually those trees that are on the,
They'll be required to get whatever approvals they need. I don't think it does. There was an offset off the scenic road
Yeah.
from my time on planning board, but I can't remember what it is. Anybody has the bylaws, it's right in
and
there.
usually whenever we're looking at them, it's always, I mean, throughout this town, there's all the stone walls that indicate most of the time the property line, so it's usually anything that's on basically the town side of this, just the walls, so the street side that we would have say over.
Right.
If it's on private property,
right, and this is on town forest property, or is
You
it?
guys own it, this is.
Yeah, that's-
It's a
But is it the
selective
town, is it under
reservation.
purvey of the town forest, or is it under
Reservation.
the select board?
It's
up
their
to us.
reservation, yeah.
Okay. So there's this tree, I see, and then,
You can
what's the
see that
second
the
one?
existing path is pretty close, so that's got quite a bit of compaction to
Mhm.
the roots. It's, you can view that either up into the ground here, you can start to see it a little bit of depth. I think that's probably from compaction to the roots already. It's not really a great spot when we start digging and excavating around those roots.
hold on, I'm just gonna,
It's gonna cause some damage to these roots. So our recommendation is to remove it. It is off to the side, as you can see in the plan, but I think with its close proximity, it would be best to remove it. And I think that eventually, if the tree did survive, that the roots would damage the lot. So the longevity of the project. I think, would be
Is this the
better.
tree that Sean had identified as in poor health? I remember when, the last time we talked about this, there were two trees. You
Yeah.
said one of them was not particularly healthy.
There's definitely some dead branches that have been noted.
Right.
I don't know if they had gotten pruned out since we last looked at it, but I did notice that further up in the canopy up there.
There's two trees that actually probably down right there too.
Yeah.
Where there's lighting, I'm not sure. Two trees that are down there.
I think that probably got hit hard with gypsy moth, my guess being an oak. And then these are pretty small trees, mostly pine saplings. And then there was one tree right here that I had tagged that's sort of on the line of something that, you know, we would hire someone else to take care of. This tree certainly is something that we would hire someone else to take care of. But that's really the only other tree that is of any size that I'd be concerned about cutting down myself.
now, I would like to, I guess, unless we have some more specific questions about this, I'd like to hear from the Farm Pond Advisory Committee about kind of where you guys stand on this in general and what you guys have done on this.
Well, we actually haven't been that involved with it. I mean, we support the activities in terms of the accessibility it provides, but it's you know, been Pat's agenda item with our support. We hadn't really had any concerns about it.
I know a lot of your focus is on water quality. Do you have any concerns about these two trees that
Yeah, there's been a lot of tree work done at the reservation because, so I think, you know, there's a bit of open space up there. There's plenty of trees there also.
I think some of the tree work was not by choice over the summer. There was that one storm that
True.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, they're exactly right.
took out a lot. Okay. So this plan's finalized then, and you guys are ready to go
Ready to roll,
once,
yeah,
okay.
November.
I guess unfortunately Pat's not here tonight because my other question before this project really kicks off, I want to make sure the funding mechanism is in place. That's my concern. I don't want a project to get started and then halfway through they say, well, I didn't raise as much as I thought I did and then the town has to come up with the balance to finish it.
Can I ask Sharon?
Yeah, go ahead.
Was, did they ever set up a donation account? Oh, Heidi's back
What's the
there.
cost, the total cost?
It is 95,
just a little under.
But not through us.
I think the estimate was always around
Oh,
100,000.
okay. So she has her own account.
She has an account, yeah.
So
It's not through the
it
town.
was kicked around on whether there was going to be an account for people to make donations.
Just a second.
But it's set up, she has set up an account to receive donations. It's not under town control, so we don't know.
she was gonna be writing a third deposit for the project tonight.
Okay.
I mean, there's a considerable amount of money raised, ready to go.
Yeah, when I talked to Pat about this, she said that she'd raised a substantial amount, but has not raised the full amount yet.
That's the only concern I have from the town's perspective. I wouldn't want to start a project that's not fully funded.
They can't come back. There has to be something in place that you can't come back to us.
Well, no, but I also don't want a half-done project if she's still raising money. That's,
I agree with George, because what you might decide to do, rather than clearing this whole area, you might then decide to say you got 70 grand, that you do the whole project but in smaller scale or something. So you might not do all of this clearing, you might make it be maybe closer, or I don't know what, but you might find a way to reduce the scope to the budget that you have.
exactly. I mean, I'm fully in support of the plan. It's a matter of making sure that it's fully funded before I would want to approve it.
So can I just take that idea and push it towards a motion by saying, why can't we approve this subject to one or two conditions? And the conditions would, it sounds like there's two conditions that you're all are concerned with. One is that there be enough money to finish the project so that the town doesn't get stuck. And the second is, you want a provision that there is no, that the town is not subject to any excuse me, small building. The town is not subject to any exposure for liability ongoing with regard to this project.
Right, exactly. The cost of maintaining it as well, I would think, right? I mean,
So why not approve, subject to those two conditions, leave it to the town administrator to put together whatever paperwork is necessary to implement that, to let these people get going. It's tough to get contractors, it's tough to get people willing to do the work, it's tough to line up work. We've got crazy weather going on left and right, so.
no, that makes sense. Go ahead, David.
In that scenario, we're cutting trees now, based on that.
Yeah, there's funding for the trees, I mean,
Right?
Well, no, we'd have to approve that those trees get cut.
right.
But it's subject to proof that the funding for the whole project, I think nothing happens until we see proof that the funding for the project is in place.
Right, which means you can't
You
start
shouldn't cut away, right, no, exactly.
Right.
And I think, and hopefully she can show us the funding's there and they can get started right away, but I really don't want to start a project until we know that all the funds are in place.
You want it under your control?
No, not necessarily. I think she has her own memorial fund. We just need to see that it's adequately funded based on what the cost of the project is.
Yeah, I have a differing view, which is, one of the trees has already been identified as being damaged. We're only talking about a second tree. You know, we've been talking about this project for quite a while. I like Paul's idea. I think Paul's idea of approving it, allowing these two trees that are on property that we control to be cut down. I don't think there's a lot of exposure to the town by taking that interim step. But I like Paul's idea. Let's get going on this project.
Oh, like I said, I think I would love for it to get going as long as we know that it's funded. And I guess the trees coming down either way are not going to affect, I wouldn't want like a walkway halfway done. That's what I'm more concerned about.
I agree with that.
Or a patio that can't be finished or.
Well, and I mean, I understand that we don't want to delay, but no one's going to be using this till next May. So I feel the rush isn't really an urgent rush. I think we should wait to find out that the funding's there. You know, I don't know what the time duration is for this, but I'm imagining that it could be done in April or May if it had to be done.
Yeah, she wants to get it done for December, you know, at the end of December.
No, I understand, but I'm sure she'd like to, maybe there's something meaningful in that date to her, but it's not going to be used, I wouldn't think, before then, possibly.
She's trying to get
So,
it done before the...
Just out of curiosity, procedurally, like, let's pretend next Tuesday that Pat's like, oh no, I have the funding locked up and I have proof. Can she just come to town hall and show it to David?
Yes, because if we approve it subject to that, yes.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like, if you guys decide to agree on Paul's proposal, which makes perfect sense, get the trees rolling,
And then that way she doesn't feel like she has to wait until like the next meeting or something, you know what I mean? Because
Right.
there's like a
No,
whole other month.
it's subject to those items, and she can show those items are done, then David could give it the go-ahead.
I would say that from our perspective, from a construction perspective, it's a lot easier for us to clear time on our schedule now than it is to do so in April or May or June. Those are our busiest months. So,
Plus the park's closed.
and then
It's actually a good time to be working.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
it's
that's
closed, we won't be in anybody's way.
Well, no, the gates are not closed.
July and August.
The gates are not closed.
What did you say? What gates?
Addie?
So I guess I know that one of the concerns Pat had, she was not able to be here tonight if she wanted to, but one of her concerns has been trying to, I don't know if everyone in town that would maybe support the project is really aware or has seen what she's trying to do, and there's a lot, it really is a gift to the town, what it will give to the town at the end of the day for allowing people who are maybe mobility challenged to have more access to Farm Pond and enjoy what we have as our jewel in the center of town. And it's, I think she's done a tremendous job of fundraising. I don't know where things are at, but we're coming up on the end of the year when people will do most of their donations, and people were more likely to fund a project or contribute if they feel that this is marching forward. So I think, again, as the language that Paul was suggesting, if there's a way to put conditions in that safeguard the town, but allow it to, support, to kind of prove to people in town that the work that she's proposing is supported and help her fundraising efforts, I think that would go a long way.
What's the total cost?
You said it's approximately 100,000?
Between 95 and 96,000.
Does that include the tree cutting?
That's a good question.
I don't think.
I don't. It would be. I would imagine that it's under 100,000.
So you guys would take care of the tree cutting?
We would hire a company
Yeah.
to do it if you wanted us to, or you could
I
do
think
it
you'd want to
in-house.
coordinate that through Sean, I would imagine.
One of-
to get the equipment in there to cut the tree.
Well, one of Pat's questions is who is the contractor that you guys recommend as a town? Is it?
Yeah, and I gave her a couple of names. Sean is, CM&D is working on so many DPW. Thank
Dead
you.
trees, yeah.
When did that change? DPW is working on so many roadside trees that I gave Pat the names of a couple of the contractors that she works with. Good luck getting them. I've tried to get a couple trees down my yard, and Stumpy, please return my phone call. It's hard to do, but I don't want DPW. This should be private contract.
Yep, that's a good point, thank you.
So we'll just buy a chainsaw and Diane.
Stanley's
All
the
right,
one that.
so I haven't followed, you made a motion?
Yes, I did.
Could you repeat it, just since we've talked so much?
That we approve the issue before us right now is the removal of 2 trees. To approve the removal of 2 trees, subject to the following conditions. Number 1, that
No, I think it's the approval of the plan, Paul, not just the whole trees.
Yeah, the trees
Yeah.
are, you guys are gonna take down the trees, period. Or you're gonna allow the taking down of the trees,
Right.
which you guys are gonna work out with Pat. And then you are subject to Pat presenting some sort of evidence that she has full funding, you give approval to the
To the
project
full
move
plan,
forward.
yes.
that's my motion. So moved.
So the motion is to approve the
Second,
plan
Paul.
for the Casal, for the proposed memorial at Farm Pond, subject to proof of funding.
Including the removal.
Including the removal of 2 trees identified.
Their expense, not
At their
town
expense, right.
Right, but the removal of 2 trees is not subject to the 2 conditions.
Right.
The 2 conditions are for the approval of the
Okay.
plan.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
I would second that.
Do I have a
motion.
second? Okay. All those in favor?
There you go.
Thank you.
Eric just said he approved it too.
He's been
All
texting
right,
me, he
so
left
we
for a
have
meeting and they haven't gotten decided yet.
We have consideration of appointments for,
I'm going to say something about one.
okay, go ahead, Diana.
Okay, so the disabled taxation, I should have kept it there, I moved them to the next meeting.
Okay, so-
It is, what did I have there?
You have
Not the-
agricultural.
no, the agricultural commission, I moved to the next
Okay,
meeting.
we have Disability Advisory Committee, Elderly and Disabled,
Taxation.
and Farm Pond Advisory.
Yes.
Okay, great. Do I have a motion to approve?
So
those?
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you to Carol D'Souza, Doug Brody, Pat Cassell, and Jackie Martin.
Thank you.
All right, Governance Task Force. You're up. You're up.
And not only that, you're the only thing between us and the Patriots.
No pressure.
No pressure there at all.
So moved, seconded,
So we want a no-huddle presentation from you.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Greg Kennan, 129 Hollis Street, one of the members of the Governance Task Force 2. With me is our esteemed chair, Corey Lincoln, and we also have Adam Page and Eddie Mae Weiss in the audience. We are here for two reasons, basically. One is that we were curious as to the progress on implementation of the 4 warrant articles that we had sponsored and that were approved at the town meeting in April, to the extent you care to fill us in. And the second is that we had also submitted to the select board some suggestions in the form of a letter dated July 29th. That came about because as part of our work, we thought that there were some suggestions that we could make based on our research into other towns, research into the townwide survey that we conducted, and our review of the academic studies that have been performed. But that these suggestions didn't rise to the level of a structural change that would require a town meeting warrant article or amendment of the bylaws that would require a town meeting vote, that these were things that the select board could consider on its own and implement either as a matter of procedure or policy. So we did send that letter in, and we're here to amplify any of those or to see if you had any questions or to see if you had any reaction.
No, I'm glad you sent the letter. I think it's good that we follow up on these, things get voted at town meeting, and it's great that you guys are following up to make sure that things are being implemented. And I'm going to kind of ask I know Sharon's been working on the I want to start, I figure we should just run through those 4 quickly and see where we're at. And I know Sharon's been working on the quarterly tax, so I'd love to get an update from her as to where they're at.
Okay. Yes, we are moving forward with VADAR. Yes, we had a meeting with VADAR. We included the assessor's office, the collector's office, the treasurer's office, the finance department. David was present, Diane. It was very positive, and we are moving forward. They are working on an implementation plan, and the goal is to roll out VADAR this fiscal year with semi-annual and be in a position to roll it over for FY21 with quarterly billing. It's a really, it's a wonderful system. There was a lot of positive feedback at that meeting, and I'm really looking forward to it.
So the first quarterly bill will go out August 1st of 2000, is that true? Is that when the first quarterly tax bill is?
Yeah.
Or it'll be due August 1st of 2020.
Yeah.
Because that's in the 2021 fiscal year.
Yes.
So I can disregard the tax bill I just got?
Yeah.
Wait for the quarterly?
You still gotta pay your 2020 taxes.
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna be all part of this whole implementation plan. We also have our DOR reps that know that we're doing this, and the assessor's rep knows that we're doing this, so we'll have a big team that's working on this implementation.
And will the implementation of VADAR, I think one of the concerns that we heard in our research was perhaps incompatibility or lack of access by one department to the information of another. Will that facilitate cross-communication?
It's going to be one financial system. There will no longer be double data entry, because right now they're using, is it Point? They're using the Point system, so they're handling all their own data entry for collections, and then it comes to us, and we have to enter it into our general ledger, and then we have to do a reconciliation every month. So there's going to be some really significant savings in terms of data entry. Everybody's going to be on the same platform. We're all going to be able to see the same information. It's really going to be a huge improvement.
Well, I think that was one of the objectives that we thought we had hoped that would be accomplished by two of the warrant articles. One is the IT coordinator article, and the other was the quarterly billing article. And it sounds like things are moving ahead in exactly as one would have hoped.
And on that note, I guess to go, did you have another question about quarterly taxes before I jump to the IT?
Yeah, just wondering.
Okay.
Go ahead. So aside from the implementation of the software, are there other critical path process items necessary to make it happen on time?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, but right now, I'm just waiting for the plan. Then the people from VADAR are gonna come in, and the first thing is to get on VADAR for our semi-annual, and then, we'll all identify all the critical paths and things that have to happen.
Because I'm thinking of, there may be other steps that you have to, and not necessarily you, right, but the town needs to inform the townspeople. All that sort of activity.
Which is why we're engaging our DOR reps and the assessor's engaging her reps, so that we're following all the right steps. But looking forward to it.
Just add one thing, Sharon, too, which I think most people already know, which is that the way we're going to be budgeting this year, and all reports advisory does will be the data are also. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that's another, we're really
Not just the
embracing,
quarterly taxes.
we're embracing VADAR. Yeah, we're really embracing it. And we're also rolling out their budgeting module. And, now we have 2 years of actual data, 3 years of budget data. It's time. And it's really gonna we'll have a much better process, and it'll be and again, it'll be one point of entry. It's not going to be, because right now we've got things in the ledger, and then I have to put it into this model, and now it's going to all be in one spot.
Right.
So.
And anybody who has a need to see or that kind of information, say for example advisory, would be able to get at that information and it all be consistent.
Yes. Yes.
Can I just point out, if I could,
Sure.
that this year, where we have semi-annual billing, we had to go borrow money. And I believe that's costing us like $8,000 or something like that in interest.
Right, the interest was higher on the short-term borrowing than doing the longer time, and we did have to borrow for about just over 2 months. We couldn't do a month because we wouldn't be able to pay it back soon enough.
Yeah.
So because we didn't have quarterly billing this year, we had to spend $8,000 of tax dollars, which we will not have to spend next year.
Yeah. Not to mention the amount of time and energy that Heidi and I had to put into just monitoring that cash every day. And, the cash flow was very, very stressful.
Yeah.
So thank you for a good idea.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, a very good idea. We're really excited about it.
If we could just add one thing, we're trying very hard to be mindful that we are appointed and that we were not elected, and we're not trying to be a shadow cabinet. But if there's anything that we can do in the next year to help make sure that all the citizens know this is coming, they'll be prepared for it, they won't be surprised by it, reminders about how things are going to go, we'd be happy to take on anything.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you mentioned the IT coordinator, so I'd like David to update if there's any.
I sent Corey a rundown of things that we have been working on. I don't know if that was August or
Yeah, and
No, but I'm saying
distribute.
for everyone to hear kind of what's happened. on the-
Yeah, I don't have it in front
Oh,
of me.
okay.
But Sharon and I talk about everything we can improve on, but for the IT, you know, I have ability to do things on IT, but there's no budget.
Right. Well, that's,
It's
are we
distributed.
moving that, I mean, I know there's been mention at some point about setting up an IT budget, so all IT dollars from all the different departments are now in one IT budget.
It would be nice to have it as its own separate department outside of.
I think that
town
makes sense,
buildings.
that the IT coordinator is coordinating all the money for IT purchases.
I just don't know if you do that during the budget process, or can you do budget transfers mid?
I can do it now.
I think, yeah, setting up for the
I
next
can
fiscal
absolutely
year,
do
the
it.
budget process, I think we should be taking an IT budget and maybe putting it under, maybe it's under the select board because it's with the town administrator. So you take the IT line items out of everybody's individual budgets and you put it under the IT.
You can do that?
Yeah, I've actually already started doing that.
So you can take
And-
the appropriation out of a department and put it under?
For next year, because.
Well, for next year.
Yeah.
not this year.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about for 2021. So then, through the budget process, we'll approve the IT items moving out of people's individual budgets and into one IT budget.
So it's much less siloed, and hopefully there's some efficiencies by
Exactly.
centralizing it.
Well, if I can just say something about
Yeah,
that. though.
absolutely.
I mean, one of the considerations that I think we were thinking of in the committee is that those individual departments no longer would have that authority and should not have a budget because they shouldn't be buying IT on their own. Even as we were talking about this in the winter, there was one department, and I can't remember which it was, but came to ask for a certain amount of money on its own, but it wasn't clear that was coordinated with potential needs.
Where it could
of-
work with DPW and other,
Yes, precisely, and frankly, I thought that one of the implications of the warrant article was that those individual departments no longer would have that authority and should not have budget for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I have a question though, I think the devil becomes in the detail, because I'm thinking of
Yeah.
the library's access to the Minuteman system. That's not, that's not town-wide, that's specialized. The fire and police department, I don't want them centralized.
They have a dispatch system, so I think.
Those need to be siloed for cybersecurity purposes,
And
so.
the schools. that-
And the schools, so.
I guess, I think, I want to make a clarification, George, and maybe this will help. I think the budget should still be in each department, because I like knowing the cost of running that department. We don't want them to have the buying power. We want to have standards where nobody, like, they're not buying Macs in one department and IBM's in another department, whatever. You want to have centralized buying so we get the group discounts for the volume of town purchases, and you want to have standard software and application standards. But I don't know why the costs couldn't be allocated, because the problem I see is that a department's going to have to justify, like if they have another hire, they're going to need another laptop. So the justification for the purchase will be tied to the department's budget, is my issue, is that in other words, we want to know what it costs to run the elections department, or whatever department we pick is, so that includes the IT costs and integrated costs. They wouldn't be able to make a buying decision in Greg's example, where they can just buy whatever they want, whenever they want. It could be a centralized purchasing and standard/policy development.
Yeah.
But I actually like the budgets being separate myself.
See, I think the point, Greg, I understand Greg's point, because it was the building inspector last year wanted a certain software.
Yeah.
But it could actually work for planning board, and it could work for DPW if you bought a software that coordinated.
No, we have, I'm sure that could be part of the standards, but I don't know that it means we have to make the costs be not distributed. We could just, Sharon can assign based on how many people, let's say we create a cost, like most large corporations divide the cost just by number of employees. So you have a site license for 3,000 employees for Microsoft Office. And so in other words, we could divide the cost by department. That doesn't mean they're making individual buying decisions.
Unfortunate legal problem is that if you appropriate money to the department that's, let's say, separately elected,
Well, if it's
they're gonna
separately
have-
elected, that's.
they're gonna have the
They
authority
have the
to spend the money.
Well,
And
there's,
so you really need to have it centralized, but there are many things, like insurance, that we buy that's town-wide, and it's an easy calculation to allocate it for purposes of
that's what I'm
budget
saying.
analysis.
That's what I'm saying.
But if you actually appropriate the money to whatever department it is, let's say the planning board, separately elected, gets $10,000 to spend on computers, legally, they have the right to spend the money. So
Well,
it's much safer to appropriate the money to the town administrator, for example, or a line item entitled IT.
We have an IT.
And then
Budget.
when he spends the money for the planning board, we know that it's consistent because he's buying it for the planning board, for the building inspector, for the board of health. He's buying the same equipment that are compatible.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but I would rather have the cost be in the department so that they can see it. I mean, you made a good point about an elected board, but there's
Doesn't
very
work
few
legally.
elected boards left. So I would like to see the cost be in the department. We do that with other things. An example is if you want to know what the police detail costs, it's actually an election budget. So as is the police details for tree work is in the CM&D budget. It's the same thing. We have a cost that's actually in those budgets. But the reason why is because the police can't predict what the detail work's going to be because CM&D has to know how much tree work and road patching they're going to do, and then they base the detail work on that.
But they spend the money, CMD spends the money. So if it's in their budget, they spend it from that budget. If you have that money in the CMD budget, under the Massachusetts legal system.
No, I understand what you're
You
saying.
give it authority to the CMD director, just spend
Spend it
the
on
money.
something else.
And then
You're saying they can spend it on something besides
Within their operating
what it was
expenses, right?
They also
allocated.
could do it.
Because you're only approving their operating expense number. They could
Total.
spend it on,
Yeah, that's true.
they could spend it on
But
anything.
you see what I'm saying? Let's say that then David comes in next year with a $100,000 budget for IT. How are you going to evaluate it? Because you don't know what, we would have to
Right.
go through this component level I'm
But I think
talking
then
about
going forward
to
it-
justify the expense to say, well, that's,
Mm-hmm.
2 new computers for the assessor's office and a new, server for the police department or whatever. We wouldn't be able to evaluate the IT budget without looking at the department detail.
If you look at cost-benefit analysis here for a second, it's a little more work for David to break out and say, I need 2 computers for this office. So it's a little more work. Maybe we spend a little bit more money on organizing it for the advisory committee to understand it, but the benefit of doing it that way is that legally it centralizes the expenditure of funds in one place.
I agree with
If you
you.
want to fully carry out what I understood the vote of the town was, and the recommendation, maybe I've misinterpreted it, we really have to centralize it to make it work under Massachusetts law.
Well, I think I'm just going to agree to abstain on this one.
I think that's, go ahead, Corey. I know
Yeah,
you had something.
2 things. When we were talking about this, it was our expectation that indeed there would be a centralized IT budget and that it would be treated like overhead in the same sense that it's insurance or electricity or something like that, that it wouldn't be necessarily still sitting within individual budgets because precisely the reason that you cited. There's another issue too, which is that it may be that from year to year, there would be larger purchases that would come out of this budget that might benefit one department more than another department, but then the next year, that might be reversed. There might be a larger ticket purchase that would be made that would benefit one department and not the other, and that you don't want to be tied to having year after year, the breakdown is going to be, well, this department gets 10% and this department gets 11.3%. That it's in one group for efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah, just agree to disagree.
All right, we want to get to see the Patriots, so we'll move to the next line item. Because I think we've talked about that one as much as we're going. The human resource consultant, I know that David hired a human resource consultant when we hired the director of the COA, so I think that's been working well. And the last one was the move to appointment of town treasurer, but I think that had a year. What year is that? That's after your term is complete, right?
And it has to be approved by the voters at the next town election.
Oh, okay. So we gotta remember that's gotta be on the ballot in the spring, okay. Great, and then the letter also had, I really appreciate you pointing out these other items. Just for the general audience, you had items of setting goals, what was the other ones? The
Mentoring, volunteer committees, credit cards.
And town hall office hours.
Town hall office hours.
And continuous improvement.
Continuous improvement, right.
Well, if I could make a few comments about some of these. I think one of the things I'd like to see early action on is this office hours business. So that there's a very nice analysis. I compliment you on the analysis about town hall being open. Many towns have not only coordinated hours, but they have one day per week where there's evening hours, so that people who otherwise are employed and have to work can come in either early or come in late, but not be stuck with sort of 9 to 5 or 8 to 3 kind of mentality that you sometimes see, which doesn't work sometimes for all the citizens. So I really welcome the idea that there ought to be a systematic look at what everybody should be doing in this town hall, what all offices should be open, when they should be open, maybe have one evening where people work till 7. Get it all coordinated. So if we want to do a meeting on a Tuesday, for example, right now, if the town clerk isn't open at the right times for that, we can't have that meeting. We lose all kinds of options. If everything is coordinated, what an improvement it would be. It would help our citizens. It would help the government function better. It makes sense. Why don't we do that?
I think it was 7 years ago, the selectmen issued something about town hall office hours.
Yes,
right?
we issued a memo to everybody.
And
Like the town hall open till 4.
It was minimally effective, and recently we have gotten the clerk's office open on Friday mornings, and some of the other ones are kind of staying open afternoon. At least they're funded till 12. I mean, staffed 12:30 to 1 or something if people come in late after the close. But I haven't been successful with about 7 or 8 elected offices of trying to extend their office hours, or, office hours reporting for employees, or extending their open hours. It's solely up to them and how they feel.
Yeah, I think one thing we have to be aware of is some of these departments, their personnel are part-time. We don't have full-time people in some of these departments, so they're not working 40 or 35 hours a week or whatever in all these departments, so we might have to find a way to stagger it.
Right,
and look
that's
at how
what I saw the suggestion in the letter said.
So it's interesting, I was going to add one point, the library changed their summer hours based on their people who are frequent library users. So they changed this summer their library hours from all the prior summers because people said, no, don't open at 10 a.m. on Saturday, open at noon and stay open till 5 instead of 3, or whatever it was. I don't remember what the details were, but they actually changed their hours based on need, or stated need of their main patrons of the library.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's a fundamental diseconomy of scale.
So I know that, for example, I've talked to... I've talked to the town clerk. I mean, they've had stayed open late, which sounds like a great thing, but then nobody showed up. So I think if we could cause it to be an experiment almost, and then measure traffic or something like that.
Well, also you have to let people know, number one.
Yeah, all of the above, but they
need to be consistent over a period of time.
Yeah.
Just open it one night for
20 years it hasn't been open, so now all of a sudden it's going to take...
Well, that plus we've started doing payments online, so now you can get your burn permits. You can do a lot of things online that you no longer have to do in person.
I
Over the
did
cour-
question one town quite a bit about what happened when they began to coordinate their hours. And they said, first of all, it had to be done with consistency over a period of time. It had to be well advertised. It had to be thoughtful about what hours they picked for the convenience of when people were available. And the other thing is they pointed out that if you had, for instance, 2 hours in the evening, well, it had to be well advertised. You really had to let people know. And even if you had, say, 2 hours in the evening and nobody came in any particular week, you still have 2 hours of working time. That, you know, theoretically, you have things that you can be doing other than responding to people that come to the window.
Yeah, the other point I was going to make was that in your survey of the 10 smallest towns in Middlesex County,
Yeah.
only one town has late hours, Ashby, which only staffs at under 20 hours a week. They have Wednesday night, they're open till 8. So it's not the norm, and I think it just reflects the diseconomy of scale. It's difficult, particularly when you're staffing at 20 hours a week. I think it's a great idea. I guess the implementation issue is going to be the elected boards, because we've been talking about this forever.
For years. I would like to see, and I've already tried to do this, is extending individual hours. So when you have a 3/4 time employee or a full-time employee, that at least they're posting that the office is open, you know, half as many hours as they're being paid for. You know, something that's more than, we had some full-time positions that were only posted for 4 or 5 hours per week, office hours. And that makes it difficult for the public. So we've made some improvements on that, but it is still a long way to go.
Well, on the issue of people
Go ahead, sir.
not cooperating with the hours, the ultimate step that we can take is to put a warrant article on the warrant for a town meeting that says this is the office hours, and have the town voted. I wouldn't want to take that step without trying it for 6 months or a year, consistency, advertising, all that kind of stuff, and reach a point where everybody, that it's working. And if there's 1 or 2 holdouts that won't do it, the ultimate remedy is to have the voters say, this is what we want.
Well, you have to look at the cost though, Paul, because we have one building inspector in town that's part-time. So he's not gonna be here 35 hours a week.
And we also have a Board of Health that doesn't have an agent ever here during business hours, because they work in other towns, so it's.
They are doing online.
They have that covered with having an administrator in the office, but we won't go there tonight. But my point is, we have some departments where the whole department does not have a full-time employee, like the building inspector. So we can't have a town vote and say, well, I want the building inspector open 35 hours.
Most don't have a full-time employee.
Yeah.
There's only a few of us.
Yeah, Jeff, did you read the letter? Because, did you read the letter?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because one of the things we talked about was sliding part-time employees so that they can cover the full day, but they're not working additional hours. That we now have departments that have 2 and first of all, we were focusing on the 4 departments that are on the first floor of this building because they are the most customer contact with citizens. And if you have 3 people working 9 to 1 or 8 to 4 or 8 to 12, you could spread them, have some of them work in the afternoon and some of them work in the morning, and you would have full coverage throughout the day.
If they're in the same department.
Well, I'm saying there are departments that have 2 and 3 part-time people that are there at the same time, and you can slide them so that they can fill the day.
Refer to departments that don't have those levels.
Saying like the building inspectors are one person.
There's one building inspector.
Well, we were basically considering, though, the 4 departments on the first floor, which have most of the walk-in citizen traffic.
Well, it turns out, for example, the building inspector and the Board of Health have a lot of walk-in traffic from contractors, not from citizens. So they're getting a lot of traffic, and they actually wanted to be there at 7 a.m. because that's when the contractors are working. So it's not as simple as the citizens only deciding it. I think
Our
is the issue.
expectation, however, would be that those departments would have their own unique hours, If you look at the chart, we were only talking about the 4 departments that are downstairs.
Okay.
So if I could just move on a little bit.
Yeah,
This
yes.
is another one I thought was really wonderful. They're all wonderful, but the one that excited me was implementing the use of credit cards. And I just think in this day and age, with such a use of credit cards generally in the business world, and also with the smartphones now that you have, like Apple Pay and all this kind of stuff, why not use credit cards? And why not allow the public to make full use of it? And I know we do have some things that we can do, like burn permits.
Still can't pay for that with a credit card online. You can't. You have to pay through a check, an online check. Because, and if it's a cost issue, there's no reason they can't charge a surcharge if you're using a credit card.
Right, that's what I was trying to lead up to, is when you do a burn permit and you make a payment, they ask you to pay the fee that is the municipal cost for that. So why not implement the system that we have for, like, burn?
I think this is a recommendation to the collector, and it's up to her whether she implements it or not.
But why not give it a little impetus by asking them to address it?
Oh, we've asked.
Well, I think you have, the power of the bully pulpit at least, if there's enough public sentiment in favor of this. And Adam, who was our primary survey master, I think will back me up on this, that the question that got the most radical response at one end of the spectrum was, would you support the use of credit cards? And the favorable answer to the far right side of the graph was the highest percentage of any of the questions.
Right.
It comes up.
Flyer miles.
Exactly.
Well, and Unibank makes it very easy. Another town where we pay taxes does exactly, you can pay by check, or you can pay, and there's an extra assessment for using a credit card, and you get to decide. But,
And maybe if the systems are right, then people don't have to come into town hall at hours that are inconvenient. They can pay online at home, and that alleviates that part of the problem too. But that's how people, as Paul correctly pointed out, that's how people live their lives these days, and the town really ought to accommodate that rather than the other way around.
I was just going to say that municipalities have been implementing swipe cards for 15 years.
Okay.
We're still not.
The Boy Scouts are accepting now either check or Venmo. If you ask our kids don't use credit cards for anything, they use Venmo.
Babysitters all use Venmo now too, which is
Yeah.
great because you don't have to have the cash in your pocket. So anyway, let's move on so we can.
I just want to
finish
make
this
one
up.
other
Go ahead.
comment, which is, I agree with Paul, these are all important points, and well written and well thought out. The first one, the setting goals, I think is highly desirable, but I also would note that when I think of the priorities we've been working on the last year or two, an awful lot of them are things that at some point were unanticipated. The problems with the library building project, major 40Bs, Coolidge Crossing, Meadowbrook Crossing, those come up, and those become very high on the priority list. And ideally, we set corporate goals all the time in my company. You try to anticipate everything. You can't, and while it's a desirable goal, it's hard to do. I think of the Farm Pond Gate, personnel issues that come up that quickly rise. If you start prioritizing the 20 projects the town's working on, a lot of them are not anticipated on day one of the fiscal year. So just a cautionary note.
So I think when we were looking at other towns, it wasn't necessarily totally just about the Board of Selectmen and town not setting these goals and priorities. It was also about how to let people in town know kind of what's on your plate, so that there's an awareness. So having a method for saying, right now, we've got a lot of issues coming at us, and we're answering to the citizens in town. These are issues that right now are on our priority, and as those things, maybe there's a system in place for quarterly kind of checking in as a board to say, are these still the highest ranking, and having it someplace on our town's website so that people in town are aware that I think it's very easy for people to get caught up in their own lives. And throughout a lot of the work we did, there was a large amount of discussion about a need for having more kind of education among people in town to engage them of this is what's happening at town hall, these are the issues that we're facing. We are grateful to the service we have from our journalism in town, to the Dover Sherborn Press and the Hometown Weekly, but it's important that we have a system for just kind of within town hall to say we know, our Board of Selectmen is working on, when it was general chemical and that was a top priority, a lot of people saw that headline, but where on our website, our town, do we have a method for getting those bullet points out of what's on it? Also to help you, as people who might say, well, we're frustrated, why aren't the selectmen doing anything on this issue? Well, because they've got these other things that right now are taking up priority.
That's a good idea. I think maybe at the beginning of the year, the boards do look at that.
So if I could, back in the day, during the 7 years or so when I was chair, we would set aside some time in the fall and work on goals and objectives for the upcoming year. And we kind of go through this process. It was time consuming. There was disagreement about where we were going to head, but we usually ended up with a list. Chuck is correct that when you reviewed it 6 months later, we found that the library took over, this took over. We weren't able to make progress on all of that, but it was a good process of trying to figure out what the board saw as its vision for the future. And the second point was that the idea of having what I call an all boards meeting, where you have a meeting, you throw open the wall here, the doors, you have every board here, and you go around the room and you ask everybody what their goals are. So the planning board might come in and say, this year we're going to work on affordable housing, for example. That's going to be their goal. And the Concom might say, well, this year we're really concerned about land management. We're going to be focused. So you go around the room and you get everybody's priorities, and you have the selectmen saying what their priorities are, and you try and sit back for a minute and look, are we contradicting each other? That one group is working this way and another group is going to be working that way. It's your one chance to kind of bring everybody together so that we're all pulling in the same direction. It's an important step to take where you've got such a decentralized government, where you have all these different boards and committees. Some of them are elected, some of them are appointed, but they're all setting their own policies, and if we don't have that kind of goal setting, we're losing an opportunity to centralize and organize.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Ken.
One thing I just want to mention is that, no, you already agreed to this. The library has posted their latest update.
Oh, no, we've still got I'm saying we're done with this agenda. We've still got more agenda. No.
I'm trying to get your item.
The finance.
I thought you were going to.
No, because we still have the reports.
Okay.
So finance director report, do you have anything other than you're dying to go watch Tom Brady lose to the Giants?
I have a couple
Sorry.
things. I'll go fast. I just wanted to let you know that advisory is working on their budget guidance. They want to get it out by the end of October. I went to the personnel board meeting last week, and
2 days ago.
was it 2 days ago?
Long week.
These 12-hour days are starting to get to me. So advisory's they're going to actually have a special meeting so that advisory can come and present their recommendations for a COLA, so I just wanted to let you know that that's being worked on. Advisory is planning on having a presentation sometime in November. And David has actually suggested that advisory send their letter to the select board, that you can review it, and David had suggested that both the advisory committee and the select board sign the guidance so that we're all on the same page. What do you think of that?
I've talked to Steve Leahy about this a little bit, and I think, advisory's role is to set guidance, and we're actually a budget maker. So I don't think that's the best idea, but I do think we should coordinate with them, and I'd love that advisory. We talked about them coming to our next meeting on the 24th, so we can coordinate schedules, and then in January, I think the big thing is having a Saturday meeting in January where we and advisory meet with all our departments that fall under the select board.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too.
Would it make sense to I advocated this before, to have they're having a meeting with all the budget makers. If we attended that, it kind of gets to what Paul was just saying. In November, what we've done in the past, I think you maybe even started it, George, was we bring all the budget makers in, and they all receive the guidance letter, but then they can ask questions and understand the assumptions. I think because so many of the budgets fall under us, we sort of add almost sort of a strong arming role, that we're telling people this is what we're looking for. It's a
number of
conflicted
budgets
role.
fall under us,
I
but
know.
the percentage of the numbers go to the schools. So
right.
Well, but they're at that meeting also.
I know. That's what I'm saying. But I think when it comes to actually signing the guidance should come from advisory. They're a separate board, and I think it needs to stay separate.
Okay.
Personally, maybe other people have a different feeling on that.
So,
Jim Ward.
So Tom Brady just now by some passes, he just is now in the number 2.
If we could finish this meeting, Paul, we could go up.
Oh, he's the goat.
David.
Oh, I just have one more thing.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted to tell you that Diane and I did have a conference call with Darren from KP Law. He's doing an analysis for us of the last 3 years.
Oh, great.
So we will have that. He's still working. It's a big job for him, but he's working on it.
He's working on it. He's coming to the November 24th meeting to give us an analysis on where we stand with whatever litigation we have going on right now. And he'll have the contract ahead of that so that you can look at it and you can sign it for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we'll try to get that to you ahead of time.
Just some announcements. The Town Forest Committee will be holding an informational meeting to discuss the forest plan on the Red Pine Forest off Route 27. The meeting will be at Town Hall on October 23rd at 7 o'clock. Bow hunting at the Rocky Narrows and written permission only, starting October 7th through December 31st. The Town Forest Committee and the trustees of the reservation are combining to open the Rocky Narrows to bow hunting only in that area. The town has vacancies in the following boards and committees: Cable TV Advisory Committee, the Energy Committee, Elder and Disabled Taxation Committee, and Metro West Regional Transit Authority as representative for the town. An interested candidate should contact Diane in the Select Board office. And then Meadow Edge, formerly Whitney Farms, will be holding their affordable housing lottery on November 18th at the Town Hall, and applications are available in the Select Board office. Also, I wanted to mention that the new COA director should be at our next meeting to be introduced by the COA. And while Addie's here, I just wanted to thank her for the great job she's doing at the COA right now.
Thank you. Here. Great. And select board reports, I know. Jeff?
Yeah, I already blurted it. I'm trying to get the 2-minute warning there, Yes, the library has published their latest FAQs, posted it on their website, and they plan to make an announcement of it on Nextdoor. They don't. One thing they're not doing, last time they did that, then they'll start getting individual questions, and they're not responding on Nextdoor. They're just making an announcement that it's and the link is there to the FAQ, and it's on the library website.
Thank you.
It has some positive news, Paul.
Does anybody else have any select board reports? If not, then we're meeting's adjourned.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.